Hello and welcome to Fintech Impact. I'm your host, Jason Ferreira. Today on the show, you may hear some background noise. That's because we are recording this live at the Wealth Management Edge and WealthStack conference, WealthStack being the tech part of it all. And unfortunately, this is going to air a couple months after because I've recorded so many episodes in advance that now we're going a little bit late into the summer. Today's guest is Haik Sahakyan, CEO of Arqa. Arqa is an artificial intelligence platform for financial advisors that can be used to extract information from various forms of static data like PDFs and allow you to extract that, push it elsewhere, and even access the information in a chatbot. And with that, here's my interview with Haik. Haik, thanks for the time today.
Thank you so much, Jason.
So Haik Sahakyan, CEO of Arqa. Tell us about Arqa.
We started on a journey where we realized that nobody was happy with their platform, at least in the wealth tech space. We looked at...
Americans are so spoiled, you have no idea how bad it is elsewhere. But continue. Tell me about how unhappy you are.
Yeah. So I used to work at Adipar. I've seen the gamut of solutions that are out there. I've implemented the multiple environments of Adipar for clients, and data was always a missing piece. And it wasn't only about the data itself in existence, it was the access to that data. Although it existed somewhere, they couldn't get to it. So when we started building Arqa, the real leverage for our solution is that we're using generative AI, which is new tech, and it scares a lot of people. And education is still a big obstacle around this space. But we use generative AI to take documents and any type of static data, put it into the data model, and then allow them to leverage Gen AI as well to then retrieve that data. So a lot of times there's insights, analytics, even monitoring that needs to happen, where a lot of these customers don't know where to go to get that data. Now, you can actually just type a question or a statement and basically get that data in through the door, which is a powerful, I think, phenomenon that ChatGPT has tipped its hat to. And a lot of people are now learning that this is the way that they want to work with machines and data versus the passive style of Google searches that used to exist prior.
It's a lot to unpack there, but you're absolutely right. What you're addressing is one of the biggest problems that this podcast has talked about forever, other than COBOL servers still being operational in banks. It's basically the fact that the back end where all our data is stored is non-standard formatted, unstructured in a lot of cases, sometimes just showing up as PDFs. And man, the data problem just inhibits so many potential use cases. All right, you're using AI to solve that. All right, so let's start off by talking about the user experience, and we'll dive into it a little bit more. All right, so I get set up with you. You're an empty shell initially, right? How do I get my data into you?
So a lot of it is working off of integrations with existing systems that exist out there, whether it's Adipar, Orion, Black Diamond, even something like Invent, that's a data lake solution. We're able to essentially get integrated on top of that data set so you can start seeing data right away.
Okay, so you're basically just tying into existing systems, great. And from there, I'm then able to extract information. I'm still able to extract in a chat format.
Correct.
Right. You're not looking to replace those other systems, right? Because the CRM is still important, the portfolio management system is still important. But when we look at, and this is a use case for how to properly structure a CRM, right? You don't want to have CRMs with every piece of data visible on there because that's just too much, right? It overwhelms. Correct. No one's going to update it properly. You want the 80% of the stuff, 20% of the stuff you need 80% of the time. But beyond that, the chatbot is a very simple and probably novel solution for how you can access that information.
Correct. So the real solution that you look at here and what Arqa does is it's an overlay across an entire system. And what that means is rather than looking at one vertical or a data set and saying, this is all I see, you're able to cross-reference and go across tenants and say, hey, here's a CRM information of the last date you visited this client and showed them a report. Since then, from your portfolio management system, here's all the changes that happened to their accounts. Why don't you create this update? So now you're actually creating this level of super employee within your firm that sees everything and is able to drive the insights from there versus just looking at one data set constantly, which we know in the AI space, it's based off of historical data. So once you give it limited data, it's really not that super powerful at all.
No, what you're talking about, you said the super employee. That's exactly what people would hire or would want their assistants to do is, hey, I'm going to meet with this client, give me the everything from here to here so I know where I am. And, that's not cheap. Humanity is not cheap, especially really good humans doing that. And of course, they're fallible, but so is the technology, but it's a lot to compile. Whereas you're going to have a non-infallible technology and a non-infallible human, but the non-infallible technology is going to get you that information a heck of a lot faster. So that makes sense. All right, so that's the kind of basic use case. Talk to me about your data extraction techniques. I mean, one of the things we talked about, or we discussed in the past, was the ability to extract information from PDFs.
Correct. So a lot of times, the way that it's been done since is using templates and OCR and some more archaic machine learning ways to get data out. Where we found a better traction in this model with AI is using generative AI to actually read the documents. So you might have multiple places on a distribution statement where it has dates that show up as notice date, trade date, data was sent to you. However, when you're actually reading the document, you're teaching it to look at these things and understand what the text is saying, now you know exactly which date you're going after. The same thing applies for any type of capital call, valuation statement, even estate planning documents, where you're actually looking at the text that's sitting in there, and it can give you state of jurisdiction, it can give you the beneficiaries and all these things. Whereas if you're looking at templates, guess what? You got to do a bunch of analysis with all the types of estate planning documents you receive to make sure you have the right template that fits it. And then when it doesn't, it rolls off into some manual workflow at the end of the day.
Yeah, this is a problem that was discussed with the previous guest with Plan, right? Because their OCR technology predates the AI stuff you're talking about here. And they had the simple problem, a lot of these things are scanned in, right? So as a page gets scanned in crooked, like how's he creating all this code to try to adjust for all these things, which, because effectively what you weren't training it to read the tax return, they were training it to look for a number in a space on a corresponding page. Correct. And if you got the wrong page, or you got the wrong slanting of that, or it got scanned in a little bit smaller than the other pages, suddenly it was looking in the wrong place. Now, this is far better because it's doing what we were doing. It is reading the document, looking for that number, as opposed to just looking for that number in that same space every time and fail if it's not there. So yeah, I like to refer to that as the generative AI version of OCR. It's doing the basic OCR, but it's digesting and finding exactly what we're looking for. All right, talk to me about the implementation timeline. You've gotten hooked up with a number of companies. How fast have you been able to get rolling with what you built?
It's almost instantaneous, because if you have the data set, you have the APIs for the data set, you can get something up and running within a matter of days. Yeah. If there are any type of custom workflows, though, that you want to account for, then that's something that will take maybe a week or two.
Is that workflow built within your system?
Correct. Yeah. So we will look at what the workflow requires from a data perspective. Do we have access to that data? What does it look like coming in? What does it look like deliverable? And then roll it out within a 2-week cycle.
Yeah, so like one use case I've discussed with you that I might possibly implement at some point in the future is most of my updates for my insurance business come in the form of either paperwork or PDFs. So the ability to simply scan that into your system and then maybe trigger a workflow to then update Salesforce Financial Services Cloud with that information with the latest data.
Yeah, something like that will take us like a week or two to actually roll out to make sure we're getting all the required portion of the data into where you require it, and then do user acceptance testing, etc. So we're very lean as far as how we operate, and we don't want to build everything under the sun if we're not going to have users for it. No. So we like to actually go with the route of let our customers and our clients direct kind of what the roadmap looks like. Obviously, if you wanted Jason's name in the middle.
That can be very dangerous, though.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. If you wanted certain things that were there where it's not usable for other clients, then that's the real tough conversation where we come back and say, hey, this is not commercially viable.
That's it.
However, with that said, here's the 2-3 workarounds that'll get you there. So my goal is to hit a majority of the requirements in a commercially viable way, and then go back for the other workarounds.
Yeah, this is one of the things I coach a lot of young startups on, is that, look, your customers are your greatest resource when it comes to feedback on the use case and future development. They're also the thing that can destroy you if you spend your time just trying to customize around their needs and not realizing that you should be saying no to the fact that they want a cornflower blue button there, right? Yeah. To steal that line from Fight Club. Yeah. But so if it's a generic use case can be applied elsewhere, absolutely. If it's specific to that firm, and quite honestly, it's just a lot of times it's a narrow thinking, right? They think they want things very specific. It's exactly how they do things. But you know what? It sometimes might just be easier for them to change how they do things a little bit, and actually, as opposed to like either trying to ask you to spend a bunch of money to do it or spending a bunch of money themselves. So, correct. Okay, so those workflows all make sense. And when you talked about how fast you can get going, to just defend that thesis from people who think that might not be true, look, one of the great things about our generative AI is it takes in unstructured data, right? So like you can take it in different forms, whereas before to get systems talking to each other was like, API is going to push out this. Where does it get slotted elsewhere?
Correct.
And you have to manually program that versus having something in the middle that figures it out.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's looking for the headers, it's looking for the data points, it's looking for the missing pieces. So you have, even while you're developing it, a co-pilot who's looking out for all these missing data pieces that you care for, and then gives you the solution back where it's, here's what it looks like to me. What do you want to do with this data? And then that's really up to you as far as what you're turning that experience into.
Yeah, one of the things that I've talked about here at this conference and elsewhere is that AI is not infallible, right? Like Correct. At the end of the day, it is just like human beings prone to making mistakes and sometimes having weird hallucinations, which is a funny term for it, because we can all be prone to hallucinations. But talk to me about what you've implemented that allows for people to like affirm that the content is correct before it gets necessarily pushed elsewhere.
So that's a topic that comes up a lot, and I think this is the one biggest obstacle that people need to overcome in this space specifically. When we talk about AI, a lot of people compare it to basically artificial general intelligence, AGI.
Yeah.
So they compare the human brain and they say, hey, I got this thing right and it didn't, etc. But realistically, how much do you need AGI to do the day-to-day tedious tasks? Not a lot. No. In the future, when people talk about, oh, it's going to replace this, we're far from that. However, what we've implemented is we've built these functions that exist in the wealth management space that live on our application, where it knows what a capital call is. It knows what a distribution. If you go historically back into what AI used to be, some of these things were expert systems like IBM built, where they said, I'm going to put the human knowledge into this thing, and then it's going to go through this model.
Yeah.
And they do that for credit scoring back in the day as well.
The expert systems were around for a long time. Absolutely.
Exactly. But you do that, but you leave it open-ended where it has the generative approach to basically saying, hey, something didn't quite fit in this model. Therefore, given the knowledge base, I know it's this. Now, where that gets a little dangerous is the hallucination. But if you build good enough guardrails around the data set you're feeding it and the data that you're expecting it to provide, you can overcome that very easily.
And your guardrails are something simple as looking for deviations in a certain amount. Like it's sufficiently, any technology is sufficiently vast is indistinguishable from magic, right? And in a lot of ways, it's artificial intelligence. People look at this and think, oh my God, this is so powerful. But when you really understand how it works, it's just a giant probability engine. And mistake here, at least the probable answer being completely wrong.
Correct.
So it makes perfect sense. And I kind of lost my train of thought there. Give me a sec. We're going to add this part about the train of thought out. There was a point I was going to make while you were talking. It was before the expert system thing. Shoot. Okay, come back to it. All right, so basically those guardrails. I get what you're saying. It's amazing how people will not accept failure from technology because they get really annoyed by that. But they'll accept failure from humans, right? This is the entire argument with like driverless vehicles. End of the day, even if Tesla's autopilot is got a lower accident rate per 100,000 kilometers than humans do right now, people don't care.
Yeah.
They think they want to have the illusion that control that they have over it is somehow going to be the differentiator.
Correct.
Because if I'm going to die in an accident, it's because I screwed up, not because the machine screwed up. You're right. Same basic problem, same basic principle, right? Is I think people demand perfection. And I've even had it with my business partners on this. Why is this wrong? It's because sometimes there's a glitch, right? Why wasn't it wrong the last 95 times you used it? It wasn't. Be happy about that.
I think it comes down to a level of comfort. If you remember, historically in finance, Excel is a big part of the operations that you do. How many times does it crash when you try to open an Excel spreadsheet?
Oh, I've broken it more times than I can count.
But you still do it again, right? And because you're comfortable with what I just opened, I know it should be there, et cetera. I think that's the level of comfort that we need to essentially achieve within this space to then allow that.
But I also think it's also a change in attitude to realize there's no abdication of responsibility.
Of course.
And at the end of the day, you need to still review the output and ensure that it makes sense. And if it doesn't, something went wrong previously, right?
Correct.
Well, maybe you did. Maybe you missed something. But the point is that I feel like people want to not have to think. And that's not going to be something that this solves for. All right, so that's what you built today. Talk to me about where you see it going.
The cool thing about what we've built is the entire platform is scalable across different operations and verticals within the wealth management space. Mm-hmm. We have core script. We have the AI chat that sits on data wherever it's located. But there is other factors of the job, performance, scenario analysis, analytics, reporting, et cetera, that can use a little AI to make it more interesting, more optimized, more efficient. So instead of you having to sit in front of a PowerPoint and create, like your presentation had, this presentation with all the financial data, you can go in there and say, give me my monthly private equity overview. And then here's the templates that are approved. It generates it for you. And then you can talk it through. Hey, I don't want this. I don't want that. And then remove it and have the final copy. This really becomes like you working with your intern, working with your back office staff, et cetera, and teaching them on what you require as a delivery, but also making it fruitful for you because it's going to happen much quicker. Mm-hmm. You're not waiting there for a 24-hour turnaround time, and you don't really have to say, is this data right or not? You can put the monitoring on top of it.
Mm-hmm. So just leaning further and further into having this super assistant.
Exactly.
Maybe you should have named the company that. Good stuff. All right. So then talk to me about what you don't think. Like when people come to you and say, okay, great, this artificial intelligence needs you to do X, and you're like, come on, guy, like that's not real. What are you being asked for that's beyond the scope of what you think is doable right now?
So I've seen a lot of things. Obviously, visualization is a big thing. And I've seen a lot of people play with the idea of, hey, we're going to create these AI-generated videos that tell the story of a portfolio. Things like that I feel are novelty, but they don't really add value to where AI is going. Yeah. A lot of times I also feel like people are very quick to offload that responsibility or tasks where it's like, hey, I'm having a meeting with a person and I wanted to do all this stuff. That's great. There's a lot of tools that'll help you basically offload the note-taking process.
Yes.
But when it really comes down to that meeting, if you're an advisor, you can't just throw your hands up and say, hey, the AI is going to do this and I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions. Because if you really think about what AI is doing, it's enabling you to do the stuff that AI doesn't do well, which means spend more time with the client, which means be more human touch, at least from an operational standpoint. So I think those are the real things that people don't look at today, but over time, as it gets more and more into our vertical, you're going to have to face the music and be like, this is something interesting that I should maybe spend more time on. This staff shouldn't be doing all this manual data entry. They should be doing better work with this client XYZ in person, face-to-face, Zoom, etc. So I think there's different ways it goes about this, but it's going to be a learning curve for all of us.
Let's go at that learning curve, because what comes to mind with all this is that it's what do they even type in the box, right? Like ChatGPT and all the other protocols now have literally suggestions for what you can do because they know this is a struggle for people.
Correct.
Because if they can't even imagine what this thing can do, how do they even start using it? And then it becomes the old Excel problem, where it used to be like 10% of all functionality in Excel was used by most people. Now that number just keeps on dropping because every time they add a feature, it just doesn't get used, right?
Correct.
So we're saturated with features. So this is a kind of almost black box of saturated features. There's no button to push, right? So basically, how do you think you're gonna have to get past this in your own platform?
So the suggestion boxes are actually funny you mention it, because the first time we had just a blank chat box and people just said, I don't know what to do. And so we had to come up with just prompts and say, press this. And then from here, it starts drawing into the thought process, right? So you have to get into the advisor's head and say, what's most valuable to you? And then from there, draw the analysis, draw the prompts and things like that start becoming more interesting. The black box is an interesting concept because what happens in the black box, you get data in and then you're going to get data out. The two most important jobs that this turns into is how good is your data coming in and how are you going to get the data you care about outside? And that's prompt engineering to basically...
Okay, pick it up, sorry.
Yeah, so that's basically prompt engineering. And I think that's where a lot of our job has been, where let's put ourselves in the advisor's shoes. Let's look at what data we care about. Let's look at how we get that data and then the workflows. Obviously, it goes back to how specific and custom of a workflow it is. But when you take that advisor brain, and put it on top, you're going to cover a lot of the use cases. That's where we think we draw the most value. We partner with really complex firms. Even the simple ones have pretty complex needs sometimes, but you want to actually build that out to be a scalable solution. And that's the real, I think, difficulty in our role. But we've, knock on wood, been able to excel at it.
Excellent. It's funny, like, think about it. If they were going to interview, the way I've framed it for people is imagine you were interviewing another human being for a job. You're going to ask, can you do this, right? Now, normally you'll say things like, can you work in Excel? Can you do whatever? No. Ask it if it can do the thing that you need it to do in that capacity.
Exactly.
And the machine will actually tell you if it's capable of doing it or not. So that's the irony, right? But I think it's so funny. I think we have this expectation of almost every technology should be a toaster. I should inherently be able to look at it and know to push the button down. And I guess there's a bit of hubris and ego involved where people get upset they don't understand how to use it properly.
Yeah, I think it's really funny you mentioned that, because you went from having BlackBerries with an entire keypad on it to the one-button iPhone, and now no button. And I think that's where people are thinking. It's just it takes some time, especially in verticals like wealth management, to make that leap. I know plenty of people who are using ChatGPT in their day-to-day. You tell them to use something like that for work, and they throw their hands up because they don't know how it works. But
it's like a loss of curiosity. Because I think about, like, even my son, when he was younger, like, just the things he would ask Siri, right? Like, he would just ask. He wouldn't think not to ask it, right? He was testing it in every way, shape, or form possible. And I think like at a certain point, we're just afraid to just not explore. And I think the more you explore with these things, the better. But that's besides the point. So before we wrap up, there's 3 questions I ask everybody on a positive note. So the first question I have for you, so if you had one wish for something to change in your company or the industry as a whole, what would it be?
I think I always go back to that education as an obstacle. I wish that in our space that we're working with, people were as open to accepting retail, institutional tech as they are retail tech. iPhone, boom, it's in everyone's hand. ChatGPT, everyone's logging in to use it. I wish it was like that on the institutional side and something in our space where people were just more open to experiment. It doesn't mean just because you have an AI GPT running a bunch of portfolio analysis that you're suddenly at its whim and you have to work with it all the time. You always have the turn off button if you don't want to log in. Yep. But I think people just need to be a little more open-minded. And I think that's where I wish I could just flip the switch and have more people understand what we're offering and how valuable it is.
You're at the early end of the adoption curve, right? You're still basically dealing with people who are either on the cutting edge or early adopters. You haven't gotten into the fast followers section yet. Quite honestly, no one's going to have a choice pretty soon, right? Because when they start seeing their colleagues staff down and basically somehow be more productive and suddenly bank those dollars and be more profitable, they're going to want to do the same thing. And if they don't, then it's interesting because one of my theses is that I don't think margin compression hasn't really been a thing for advisor compensation, right? It's been expanding the service offering and the product cost has come down. I think this is where margin compression, not margin compression happens, fee compression happens because this will improve margins. And that improvement of margins will lead to people choosing to make as much or more money while also lowering their top line. So it'll be interesting to see how it works. Second question I have for you is what's been the most difficult thing in getting to where you are today?
With something like Gen AI being so new and us coming with so much institutional knowledge of financial data, it's been hard to merge the two off the bat. It's something of a learning curve for our developers, for our team to understand what's possible, what's not. And sometimes it was just us asking the LLMs, what should we ask you so you would do this? And then it would tell you, right? And it's a cheat sheet. But realistically, we had to get that training because it's such new tech. And finding real experts in the space, we have PhDs in our team that work with it. That's great. But realistically, when you're trying to mind the gap with practical use cases, that's where it becomes difficult. And all of us are in that infancy kind of stage. But knock on wood, and we've been fortunate enough to have really good people who have been open-minded with technology to basically understand what's at their fingertips. And we've been able to excel quicker and quicker. So the development lifecycle with generative AI is much shorter than a traditional script and the development that we've experienced in the past, which I think if you can get the bull by the horns and ride it, then I think there's a lot of opportunity at the end of that path.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I think this is like the nth degree problem of the robustness problem that I refer to. So I'll often say, look, the great thing about Salesforce is that you can do anything with it. The problem with it is you can do anything with it. So what are you going to do is the problem. So the number of companies who adopt it and are disappointed because they expected to solve every solution. But wait a minute, you didn't have processes and all this other stuff mapped out that you could digitize. You just thought it was going to be this God machine that fixed you. That's not how it works. It will enable you to basically digitize your process. And I think about this as being the greatest black box of that ever, because it's like, hey, ask me to do anything. What do I ask you to do and how do I ask you to do it? It's just, and even I still come across like use cases for ChatGPT where I see people like, I didn't know I could do that. And I don't think that's ever going to end at this point.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. So, and the last question I have for you is what excites you about what it is you're working on and gets you up in the morning to keep on fighting the good fight?
I think when I look back at what we've achieved so far, and the doors we've opened from advisors, even standpoints, where we show them, hey, you could do this. And then they go, I could do that with the data I'm sitting on today. I think that's something really interesting and something of a knack where I used to work on client implementations for big software and getting people into that success where they were like, hey, I don't have to do it this way anymore. Now I can do this. That learning and teaching kind of process is very exciting. You're opening up a doorway for a lot of people for their businesses to be very successful, profitable, to differentiate themselves to those who dare. And I think for me, having created those relationships in the past that now I can turn and say, hey, there's this whole new way of doing it. You're at the forefront of the AI financial revolution and you're leading the pack. And I think a lot of advisors who are open to it, even testing it out, are going to be the ones that kind of stay around for the longer term. So I think for me, every time I wake up or every time I have a demo, it's exciting because I know the reaction I want to get out of people is, and I had this with someone who reached out recently. They said, I don't know what I expected to see, but it wasn't this. And I always ask them, I don't know if you're telling me something positive or negative. And they say, it's positive, but I just didn't expect this. Yeah. And I've learned to deal with that response because what ends up happening is you tell them, step back, digest what you just saw, and then come back to me. Yeah. And a lot of times they come back with a list of questions. Can you do this? Can you do this? And the answer to most of them is yes.
Starts flowing. Yeah.
Exactly. So I've, as a sales business development part of all this as a founder, learned to drop that seed, plant that seed, and then walk away, let them water it, and then they come back with a bunch of requests, which help us because then we learn exactly what they care about.
Absolutely.
So it's been a great journey so far, and I'm looking for more of it.
Oh, it's funny because a couple of years back, we had saying data's the new oil was the big thing. To me, basically artificial intelligence might be the oil rig. And people are going to discover just how well they can convert that information. It's good. Glad you're at it. I was impressed and look forward to seeing where you guys go.
Thank you so much for the time, Jason.
My pleasure. So that was Haik Sahakyan. CEO of Arqa. It was Arqa, not Arq, like I said earlier. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever it is you get your podcasts. And until next time, take care.
This podcast was brought to you by Woodgate Financial, an award-winning financial planning firm catering to high-net-worth individuals and their families. To learn more, go to woodgate.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, or find more episodes at jasonferreira.ca.